When I was, my kids were starting to grow up, they were becoming teenagers. I began to feel very restless, and there was a point in time in which I felt a call to ministry. And I remember voicing it in our small group, which didn't go over very well. The people in the group basically let me know that I couldn't do that because I was a woman. Yeah, I did have an inner tenacity that I can't explain. And I can only say that it probably came from God. And so there was this tenacity all through, especially through my seminary career. I felt this inner tenacity that is really hard to explain. And it got me through some really tough times.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast. I'm Bruce C.E. Fleming, Executive Director of the True 316 Foundation, and our website is tru316.com. We're going to have a wonderful interview this episode, and Joanne Hagemeyer, my co-host, would you bring us in?
Thank you, Bruce. My pleasure. We are here with Pastor Faith Todashek, who has served as senior pastor in several Methodist and Covenant churches, earned her undergrad degree at Crown College, and her Master of Divinity at Bethel Seminary. She currently serves as the senior pastor of Grace United Methodist Church in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and has been married for 45 years, has 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren. We are delighted to have you with us, Faith.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So Faith, I discovered on Facebook, and she was talking about a sermon series was coming up, and I was on a long road trip, and I thought, I'm just going to reach out. So it's been a couple of years now. We've been in touch, and I've had a chance to visit her church and preach there. And you have a bilingual, how do you define your congregation?
We have a congregation that's immigrant friendly. And so we have a number of immigrants who worship with us. Some are Spanish speaking. We have some new immigrants from Ethiopia that are attending. And I don't know, we're just getting that reputation in St. Cloud, where there are many, many immigrant groups.
So when I was there, we had the privilege of having it simultaneously translated into Spanish, for example. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we have a large group of Hispanic people. In fact, we just launched a Hispanic Bible study that is also becoming a church. It won't be long, and it'll be an actual church plant.
So do they meet in the building during the week?
Yes, they do.
So what time of the week, just example, how do they do that?
They meet on Saturdays at 5 p.m. and they also meet for prayer Tuesdays at 5 p.m. So, yeah.
Some delightful brothers and sisters in the Lord. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So why don't you start out, Faith, with your faith story?
Well, since you emphasized the word faith, I'll start with how I got the name Faith. I was a premature baby, and there was a wonderful little nurse in the NICU. And whenever I stopped breathing, she would pray for me. She resuscitated me, though, and then she would pray for me. And it happened 3 times. And my family also called all the prayer chains in our little town. And many people were praying for me, and I did survive. And here I am. So they named me Faith. But I came to Christ as a 5-year-old in a little Pentecostal church in Bloomington. And it was a very real experience. I really did encounter God as a 5-year-old and continued in the faith. And of course, as most teenagers do, we had many opportunities to rededicate our lives and, surrender our lives and all those things at the youth meetings. So that's my faith story.
Yeah. All right. So you know the Lord Jesus Christ as healer and as personal savior.
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah. So from there to the pulpit, how did you do that? Let's hear about your ministry story.
Do you want me to start with the call?
Absolutely. Sure.
Okay, when I was my kids were starting to grow up, they were becoming teenagers. I began to feel very restless, and there was a point in time in which I felt a call to ministry. And I remember voicing it in our small group, which didn't go over very well. The people in the group basically let me know that I couldn't do that because I was a woman. And so that was kind of hard. But I did enroll at Crown College and in the Christian ministry program, thinking that for certain, there would be something for me. And I remember the first day of class was such a funny story because the first day of class, there was a man in our class, and he looked around and saw all the women in the class and objected. And it wasn't long before he left. And the next time our class met, he was no longer there. So it was kind of a weird experience. And it's kind of happened all along the way. But the Lord has been really faithful around the call and keeps reaffirming that this is the path I should go on.
Did you have the same experience at Bethel?
I had very supportive professors at Bethel, but there were students who often challenged me on my reason for being there. So
Both men and women?
At Bethel, at the seminary, largely men. But in my second call, there were some women who challenged me on my call to ministry.
So you said call, and then you mentioned Crown College. So what's a call? How did you know?
I just felt a strong desire to preach and teach the Bible. And so it was a very strong desire, and I don't know, I can't really explain that. But it was just a very strong desire. And when I first read and heard that women could be preachers, I was just elated. So yeah, that's kind of how it began.
I'm curious where you read that.
We had a little women's Bible study when my kids were growing up, and we would meet for prayer and study. And one of the women brought in a cassette tape. So this shows you how old I am. She brought in a cassette tape, and it was from Church of the Open Door, and Pastor Dave Johnson was preaching on women in ministry. And we all listened to that with rapt attention. And we were so excited that God indeed could have called women as well.
But it's in that same group that you found a little bit of a pushback.
That was a different group. So the women's group was a group of women we all had little children at the time. And then the other group was a small group. It was a couples group.
So
different.
Go ahead, Joanne. Go ahead.
I was just trying to tweeze out that it was a different dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first group, you were listening to teaching from a pastor, and the second group, you were talking about a call, and it was a couples group, not a mom's group.
Right. In the mom's group, we were listening to a teacher by our pastor, yes. And then the couples group, I was just sharing my heart. So
yeah.
So when you finished Crown College, you ended up somehow keeping on. Why did you go farther?
Well, I had a couple of professors at Crown College who were fantastic. One was Dr. Carl Polding, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but they were both very, very encouraging. And I was given the class key, the honor key, and invited to be the class speaker. And so I was very, very encouraged by some of my professors to move on and attend Bethel Seminary. So I did enroll at Bethel Seminary, and that's where I started the seminary journey.
So both
you were determined.
These schools are both in the Twin Cities area, so you were able to get to those areas. And you and Dan were living where?
We were living in Buffalo, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have an inner tenacity that I can't explain. And I can only say that it probably came from God. And so there was this tenacity all through, especially through my seminary career. I felt this inner tenacity that is really hard to explain. And it got me through some really tough times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are there any anecdotes that you could share where God gave you either words to say or an illustration to give or something that got you through?
Oh boy. Yeah, there was at the beginning, at the entrance of the seminary was a little saying from Isaiah on the call of Isaiah. And that I saw that every single day. And that really meant a lot to me. I think it came from Isaiah chapter 6. And so that meant a lot to me. It kind of gave me courage to keep going. There were a few times when, and I just felt the Lord with me and the Lord's presence with me. And I don't know that I always, I don't speak up a lot. I didn't speak up a lot in class. I was kind of a shy student at the time. And so I didn't say a lot, but I learned a lot. And I did feel the presence of the Lord with me all the time.
So how were you able to start using your ministry skills and gifting?
This is such a funny story. Again, it's a testament to God and how God is at work even when I don't see it or notice. And so there was this little old lady, her name was Beverly, and she was went to high school with my mother-in-law. And there's a little church in Becker, Minnesota, and it had been closed for a year. And the people in the congregation thought, oh, we should restart the church. And so they gathered together and tried to figure out where they could find a pastor. And so my mother-in-law, who was best friends with Betaloo or Beverly, she called me up one day and said, I heard that you preach. And I said, yeah, I do. And I thought I was taking a job as pulpit supply, but they thought they had hired me. And so we had to have a little back up the truck conversation about what just happened. And at the time, I had a wonderful spiritual director, and he suggested, he was, an old pastor in the Presbyterian church, and he suggested that maybe I take it as an interim role. And so I did. And we talked about how to do a call process, and we started a call committee and put together some of the things about the church, and basically us started searching for a pastor. And so it was fun. It was really interesting because I had to dig up. They had lost their church documents, and they had lost all of the things that that the organizational documents, and we found them. And there was this 95-year-old fellow that helped us reinvigorate all of the original documents of the church and restart the church. So it was quite the deal. So that little church I was there 3 years, and I'm kind of a outward focused person. And so, I didn't have any money, and church didn't have any money. And so I went around the neighborhood with a couple of flyers and put flyers in people's mailboxes, and it probably wasn't legal, but I didn't know. And the church started to grow. And at the end of my time there, 3 years, we had a congregation of 50 people or so.
Oh.
So started with about 15. So it was pretty fun. It was a lovely little congregation, Snake River Church, out in the middle of a cornfield.
So when you got your Master of Divinity, you learned how to do a lot more than preach and teach. And I'm just curious, when you did your church, your first church, did that 3-year stint, as you called it, what did you find that you knew how to do and you hadn't taken classes, or you're so glad you did take that class? Because there's a lot more to being a pastor, I'm suspecting, than preaching and teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot more, a lot of leadership roles, and a lot of leadership thing helping lead them to health, because it was a very unhealthy congregation when I started, and they grew in their health, and they grew in their ability to resolve conflict and deal with difficult issues that arose in the church. And so I led them through that as well. So, yeah.
Mm.
Pastoral
And
care, did pastoral care. It was a elderly congregation and started a Sunday school. We started a broom ball ministry. My husband and I played broom ball. And so we gathered up the neighborhood kids and played broom ball and just had a lot of fun, basically. Oh, and music. My husband and I both have led worship for many years. And so we started a music team and equipped some other individuals to play keyboard, and started a worship team and kind of moved them into the 21st century worship-wise.
And they loved you. They loved you as their woman pastor.
Yeah, they loved me so much, and they loved my husband. In fact, we had to deal with a couple little things because they started calling him pastor too. And bless his heart, my husband got up one morning in front of the congregation and just affirmed me as pastor. And he said, I didn't go to seminary and I don't preach and teach. And I just want you to know that my wife is the pastor and I'm here to support her. And so he was fantastic. So he handled that really well. But, I don't know, it's typical of rural congregation is they always feed the pastor. And I was always watching my calories. And so they brought desserts and cookies and pies and all kinds of food to my husband. And so he kind of took that role. And my spiritual director also, he was so wise. He also said, some of those little old ladies just need a hug. And so Dan, my husband, he would stand at the door and welcome everyone and give all the ladies a hug. And yeah. It's kind of
Hug ministry.
Yeah, it was a fun little church. And one of the things my spiritual director said, you just love the people and help them follow Jesus. And that's what we did.
So how do you move from that church to the next church?
So I was seeking to be licensed in the Evangelical Covenant, which was my home church when I was at Monticello Covenant. In my internship, we helped plant a Hispanic congregation. And so that was my home church, my sending church. And I had always wanted to be in the covenant. And so I met with the superintendents and to seek open calls. And there was no calls available in the Minnesota area. And so the East Coast superintendent said there was some availability in Connecticut. And we talked about it, Dan and I, and went out to visit and candidate for a church. And they liked us and invited us to come, and we went. It was a really tough call. We experienced a lot of opposition in the community around women in ministry. I had a woman in my church invite me out and tell me I was in sin for doing that. I had a local missionary pastor who invited me over for dessert, my husband and I. And then as I was leaving, he gave me a brochure it was all about why women pastors is an aberration, where it's a sin in the eyes of God. And so those kind of hurt. But in addition, it was a very difficult call. It was a church in decline. They had significant control issues in the congregation. They only had about 12 people left. And, I thought, well, we turned the church at Snake River around. Maybe we can turn this one around. And we had a lot of hope and faith. But it was a completely different dynamic. And while people were good Christian people, there was a lot of dysfunction in the congregation. And I was not able to turn it around, and turned back to Minnesota with a broken heart. And I believed I would never pastor again. I went to the denomination and there was nothing available, no open calls. So I just thought, well, I'm done. And then my son was working on his PhD at NDSU, and we went up to visit him in Fargo, and the pastor was preaching on the famous passage where Peter is restored to ministry after he had abandoned the Lord. And I heard the voice of the Lord distinct. It was a distinct moment. And I heard the Lord say, "Faith, feed my sheep." And I realized that I wasn't done yet and that I was to keep going. And so I went back to my town in Buffalo and I started a house church, and we did that for 5 years, my husband and I.
True 316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to true316.com/partner. True 316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new true partner who gives to the True 316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our True School workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the True 316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our true partners. Please join now by going to true316.com/partner.